thank you everybody for joining us for what I think is a really important topic. So today's webinar is get along and go far, right? And it's how we improve our relationships at work, even, and this might be the key part, even with difficult people. Let me get just a couple of housekeeping things. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. And so if you want to stay on mute, that's probably going to be helpful for everybody. We have a massive group today, including people that are streaming, right? This is me, by the way. Most of you know me. I've been with DHRM for about 15 years now, 16 years, something like that. The only thing I will tell you, I'm going to warn you right now. One, you can see I have more gray hair than I did even in this picture. Two other things. I over prepare and I talk really fast. So if you will forgive me for that right now, I think this will go a lot more smoothly for us. I am a chronic over preparer. We have this information is so good and so critical that we're gonna have to stay at about 30,000 feet and then give you the tools and resources to go dig a little deeper. But I have to talk fast too, because I do anyway, because I get hyper and excited about stuff, and so that we can get to all the things that we need to talk about. Okay, so moving along quickly. The other thing I have to do is please put on your calendars right now next month's Off the Shelf, where we'll hear from JJ Acker about participative decision making. Now I'll leave this to you to read. I'm not going to read this whole thing with you, but I will just tell you right now, JJ always gives very actionable, very practical advice when he does Off the Shelf. It's always delivered very concisely, very clearly, and you're going to come away with tools on how you can better implement participative decision making. So please go ahead and mark your calendars. Now Shane will be sending out the sign up for this, but in either your mental calendar or your actual calendar, please go ahead and plan on attending this. It's going to be well worth your while. Right? So what are we going to talk about today? In short, we're going to talk about how to have better relationships at work and why it's so critical. I'm going to give you a lot of data, a lot of social scientific evidence about the importance of relationships at work. We're going to do something that I have avoided. The second thing we're going to talk about, I have literally avoided this for almost 18 years now, is how to work with difficult people. And then we're going to conclude with the difference between givers and takers. Now, one of the things I will tell you is so many of the trainings that we do live and virtually, at least obliquely, cover this topic of how to interact with difficult people. We have on Off the Shelf on emotional intelligence, how to have difficult conversations, organizational conflict. We have an old webinar of that. Team building in virtual environments, how to improve employee engagement, one on gratitude. All of these resources are available to you right now, and I promise you, if you spend some time in them, even if you participated in the webinar live, you'll be reminded of tools and principles that'll help you, especially in dealing with difficult people, right? Difficult people, okay? So a reminder of that. Now, I have for 15 to 18 years, one of the most common things that I've been asked is, Dan, can you do a training for us on one, intergenerational workforce, and two, dealing with difficult people? And I have avoided it. And I'll tell you why. One, that the evidence for intergenerational workforce is not that strong. In other words, the 50-year-old now in the workforce and the 25-year-old aren't that different. When the 25-year-old becomes 50, they're going to be very similar in what they value and what they want. Okay, so there's that. But let's talk about why I've avoided this difficult person one. Because, and we'll talk about this a lot, I'm very reluctant to start labeling people. And I'm also very reluctant to start calling people difficult, because you and I are difficult for other people, right? So because we talk about emotional intelligence, because we talk about communications, difficult conversations, conflict resolution, all this kind of stuff, I have tried to avoid it. But I've reached a point now, I had an experience with my daughter recently where I'm like, okay, maybe we're at a point now where it's time to talk about dealing with difficult people, improving relationships at work. So I don't remember where my wife was, but I was doing my daughter's hair, and her best friend in the world is Greta. And I was combing my daughter's hair. She was 6 at the time, just almost 7. And she's like, Dad, can you believe, you know what I found out today? I said, what? Greta is her best friend in the world. She said, Greta doesn't like Elmo. And she was just dumbfounded by this, right? Greta doesn't like Elmo. I'm like, well, Greta's smart. But anyway, I was like, oh, Well, I thought this was a teaching opportunity. I said, well, honey, there's some people in the world who like Elmo and some people who don't. And her response was this. She said, well, I'm on the good side, and you know which side that is. I was like, okay, apparently we've jumped to good and evil here as it relates to Elmo. But what happened there with my daughter, we can let her off the hook at age 6 or 7, but we're doing this in the world today. Increasingly, we vilify those that disagree with us. We vilify those that have different views than us. This is creeping into the world for sure. Arthur Brooks calls our current culture a culture of contempt. And of course, Governor Cox has really bought into this with his Disagree Better initiative. Well, what does he mean by the culture of contempt? Right. Well, political scientists, this is true, right? They're saying that our nation is more polarized than it's been at any time since the Civil War. Think about the post-Civil War era. It was less polarized. Think about the 60s, even with counterculture, it was less polarized. Today, we're more polarized since we've actually had a war over our differences, right? Arthur Brooks also says we're in the midst, and this is certainly true with technology and social media. There's an outrage industrial complex. In other words, it is your anger towards another group is marketable. There is money to be made in you and I narrowing our views of things, and that's if our politics are going to divide us, that's fine. But why would we assume that this toxicity, this contempt, wouldn't seep into our workplaces? And the problem is, the evidence is, even if you and I don't disagree politically, we are now being conditioned that when I disagree with someone, I hold them in contempt. And the evidence is that it is seeping into our workplaces, and this is problematic. Look at some of these numbers. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist, said on average, our bosses at work are the number one unhappiness provoking individuals with whom we spend time on any given day. Supervisors, I hope this doesn't depress you. Okay, but this is a really telling finding from Daniel Kahneman. I'm going to go through these quickly. Okay, we're going to do this all very quickly. Look at these numbers here from Amy Gallo, who we'll be relying on a lot today. 94% of people reported working with a toxic person in the last 5 years. That the team culture suffered as a result. Okay. 33% of survey respondents had left a job. This seems high to me. 33% of people responding to the survey said they left a job due to an annoying or arrogant coworker. We're going to talk about, well, is that a reason to leave just because someone's annoying, right? And the number one source of tension at work was interpersonal relationships. Okay, more numbers. I'm going to throw them at you here quickly. In this survey done in 2013, 11 years ago, right? When we had negative relationships at work, we were treated what we felt was unfairly or without civility. 48% intentionally decreased their work effort when they were exposed to that. 47% intentionally decreased the time they spent at work. 38% decreased the quality of their work. 66% said that their performance declined. This is massive, right? Simply because of, I didn't like the way I was treated by someone at work. 78% said their organizational commitment declined. I'm looking to leave because I don't like someone here, or I don't like the way I'm treated. 25% admitted to taking their frustrations out on customers. That's a big deal, right? And then 12% said, I left. I left a job, right? This one is terrifying to me. Again, from Amy Gallo. Of 4,500 doctors and nurses and other hospital personnel, this is 71% linked negative behavior such as abuse, abusive conduct, people that were condescending or insulting, to medical errors, and 27% said they think it led to patient deaths. This is a big deal that is a pandemic in our organizations today. Okay, this is a big deal. Now, there was a book that came out based on a study, the longest study on happiness ever done by Harvard. Right, and they say that this finding is surprising. I don't think this is that surprising. But if what they found, their biggest conclusion over this decades-long study of what led people to have happiness and fulfillment in their lives, well, this is it. They say surprising answer. I don't think it is, but surprising answer is relationships. The stronger our relationships, the more likely we are to live happy, satisfying, and healthier lives. In fact, the Harvard study of adult development reveals that the strength of our connections with others can predict the health of our bodies and our brains as we go through life. So this book, The Good Life, says that it's your relationships, including those at work where you spend the majority of your waking hours. Those relationships matter. And maybe also interesting, when you and I have negative relationships at work, I won't be giving you any slides about this, but there's lots of evidence that when we have negative, toxic relationships at work, or when we have positive relationships at work, there's a clear cause and effect to overall health, not just mental health, but physical health. Okay. And so all the studies, Shasta Nelson, who wrote a book called The Business of Friendship in 2020, says every single study says that liking who you work with is one of the most significant predictors of our engagement, our retention, safety at work, our productivity. There's not one study, and I haven't found one either. She says there's not one study that it says we aren't happier and that we don't perform better when we have friends at work. When we do have friends at work, everything is better. Have I made a strong enough case? Have I made a strong enough case here that this matters, that we're in this crisis right now of toxicity in the workplace and that relationships matter? I think that's axiomatic, right? I think most of us know that. But so the question then becomes, how do we have friends at work? And by the way, I'm not a huge Friends fan. There are a couple of Friends things on here. I had a colleague say, I didn't know you're such a Friends fan. No, it just fits the theme, okay? It's fine. But anyway, how do we proactively, we'll get to the challenging relationships at work, but how do we go out of our way to proactively create positive relationships at work? There is a science behind this, okay? There is a science behind it, and it's these 4 things. Stay with me here. One is proximity. Going left to right, top to bottom here. Think about this. Who are your best friends growing up? Okay, who are your best friends? My hunch is that your best friends were those that lived around you, because that's proximity. That's that we tend to have positive relationships with those who are around us, right? Well, how do you, if we know that proximity matters for relationships, how do you account for that in the hybrid world? Okay, how do we account for that? One of the things is we may need to make sure that when we are teleworking, when we are at home, we are still having enough meetings, even for social purposes, that there is this virtual proximity. Okay, so proximity matters, right? We like the people that we're around. Similarly, familiarity. The more we are around people, the more we tend to have positive relationships with them. This is called the mere exposure effect. It's why it's so funny. It's so Coca-Cola, everybody knows what Coca-Cola is. Everybody sees it. Coca-Cola still advertises this everywhere because they know this mere exposure effect. I tend to look more favorably upon that thing that I am more familiar, I am more accustomed to, the thing that I'm more comfortable with. This is the same with relationships, right? Okay. Now, again, how much time are you spending together virtually or in office with other people? Okay. But those top 2, a lot of times there's not as much that we can do proactively with those things. Your coworkers are your coworkers, right? So what about similarity? We know that we have better relationships with those that we have more in common with. Now, the problem is you and I tend to think that, well, unless this person and I both like hunting and this person and I both like mountain biking, well, then we don't have a lot to talk about. What those that are good at building positive relationships and even friendships at work know is that you have more in common with people than you realize. And you don't know that you have that much in common with people unless you're willing to share. And so it says there that it can be anything, really. Are you proactively going out of your way to have conversations and dialogues with those that your coworkers about who they are, about their interests? Those of you that have had live training from me before know that I like to start my trainings with you sharing. If you could only listen to one band or musician for the rest of your life, who would it be, right? If you could only watch one movie for the rest of your life, what movie would it be? A lot of that is so you and I get to, we have people across the room go, oh, you're an Eagles fan too. Okay, yeah, hey, and you build that connection. This similarity gives us the foundation for where the real friendship starts to take place, and that's self-disclosure. Okay, and it says there's small talk to deep talk. Once you and I learn that we have similarities, we both, at a minimum, we're concerned about our kids. We both have animals that we care about, or we both think exercise is really important, or whatever else it is. Now we can start getting into vulnerability. The real secret sauce for friendships, in or out of work, is self-disclosure. Have I been vulnerable and revealed something about myself to you? And I can trust you with that. You have not used that against me. And you, likewise, it can't be a one-way street. You have also been vulnerable with me, and I've shown you that, yeah, you can trust me. Think about your closest relationships. These are people that know you. They know the positive professional you, but they also know your weaknesses. They know your hangups. They know your insecurities, right? This can be personal, home, or work life. This self-disclosure, once we know that it's there, then we truly have friendships at work. Okay, this really is how friendships are formed and maintained at work. This self-disclosure. Some of you are less comfortable with this than others. That's okay. That's okay. But that look at the bottom, similarity and self-disclosure. I'm not sure the self-disclosure and the vulnerability happens until you and I've gotten better at learning about each other. Similarities, right? So let me tell you about an experience I had. This is me. That is not my wife, by the way. That is Norma Romero. So I did coaching years ago, 6 years ago or something, with this group, that this executive team of all these dental partnerships. They've got like 150 dental practices that they oversee, and two of their executives, one was like the chief financial officer. This was the chief operating officer. They were in serious conflict. So this is me and Norma. I'll just tell you, it was kind of embarrassing. They asked me to come speak this last Labor Day at a retreat they have in Cancun. I'd never been to Cancun. So we go, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'd done coaching with Norma on this conflict she was having with a coworker. And I went up, I'm like, told my wife came with me. I'm like, I need to go talk to Norma. She had no clue who I was. I was like, Norma, hey, I did coaching. I had to reintroduce I was like, hey, I helped you all that time, So anyway, but then once I remind her, I'm like, hey, I did coaching with, you and Jody were having a difficult. She's like, oh yes. And it was very touching. She's like, Dan, I cannot tell you how much you helped me. In fact, she and Jody, this is the C-suite. They were not talking to each other. And she said, we still talk to this day, Dan, because of the interventions that you did. So one of the things I did, I will just tell you right now, this is going to seem hokey to some of you. Jody and Norma were having problems, but they asked me to come out. This was in San Antonio. This was in Fort Worth. They asked me to come out and meet with their entire C-suite. And one of the things that I did, remember, vulnerability and self-disclosure. Some of you would hate my guts if I came to your team and I did this, but I said, one of the things that I want you to do, I asked them each to share. We went around the room and I made them share the most difficult thing they experienced from their childhood. Right, this sounds a lot like therapy, okay? I said, look, I'm not forcing you to share things, but I want you to share what you would say is the most difficult thing. So you get to choose what that is. The tears in that room, the empathy in that room started to change this executive team, okay? Because now they had a vulnerability there and self-disclosure that had not existed between Norma and Jody before. That was just one of the interventions. And the other thing I'll tell you, the reason I'm smiling in this picture is because she finally did. It was very gratifying. She's like, nope, Jody and I still talk to this day. A lot of the things that we're going to spend the remainder of our time talking about, these little interventions that some of you will think are hokey, that some of you will think are corny. I'm telling you, I have seen the evidence at low levels in organizations and very high levels like this with Norma, their COO, where it actually made a tangible, real difference. In this case, it happened to be this exercise of vulnerability. Just simply answering. We took about 45 minutes with this exercise, write down and then share with the group the most challenging thing from your childhood. It was so revealing. It got emotional. It was powerful. Okay. This vulnerability really, really works. Okay. I'm from Rodden Friedman, a book I've recommended to a lot of you. I won't read this verbatim here, but essentially there was a big study that they did where they give friends, people that were actually friends versus acquaintances and strangers, tasks to do. One was like remedial, just kind of manual labor, and the other tasks required a lot of collaboration. Friends outperformed the acquaintances on both tasks. And the reason they learned is that there was better communication while doing the activity. There was more positive encouragement because these are friends, right? And interestingly enough, even though they were friends, they were more critical. And they gave each other more feedback, not less, more, because there was that trust built where you can say things to those that you have a trusting relationship with, right? So friendships at work truly, truly matter. So Ron Friedman again here, this proximity, familiarity, similarity, and self-disclosure all play a role. The trick, what you and I have to do is how do we create an environment where those things come out naturally? I do this with permission. You're looking at a picture there of the leadership and organizational development team. Okay. These are, I'm there at the front left, and then you got 7 people there that are talented, capable, in some ways remarkable professionals. I genuinely believe this. I got to be careful how I say this. I think this is the happiest I've been as part of a team. I'm not a natural manager. Okay. I'm just not a very natural manager. I kind of like to worry about my own stuff. But this team has both unconsciously and consciously said, we want to have the best team possible. How do we do that? And we have gone out of our way. We've got a couple people on the team that are really good at being like, hey, when we have this team meeting, let's do things where we get to know each other better. They know I bug them all the time if we go out to lunch or something. I'm like, hey, if you could only, have lunch or dinner with a dead famous person, who would you pick? Or, those kinds of things. I can't help but do that. I like to get to know people. But I'm telling you right now, we happen to be very lucky on this team. Truly. I hope this doesn't offend anybody. We have no a-holes on the team, is what we always say. It's just remarkable. And we have people that are generous, they're patient, they're service-oriented to each other, but also it's not an accident. We also work at it. Right. So we did a webinar about a year or two ago where Dr. Jennifer Thronson came on. She's with USVE. And she said when they were meeting primarily virtually, they would carve out recess time at work, where it's just like your kids at school have recess where they get to actually socialize. Even in virtual settings, are you carving out time where it's like, guys, we're just shooting the breeze. This is a time where we're just going to talk to each other. Then there's other ways that you can make this happen. There's in-office activities, lunches, potlucks. When I was at my office was at the corrections building in Draper, there was a ping pong table brought in. People would play ping pong, good at ping pong, bad at ping pong. People that were good would come in. Other people would come in and watch. We'd socialize. It was great. Another suggestion, this is less popular in the state. You've got to be careful with this. And I mean the state of Utah, not the physical state of Utah, but is outside of work activities. I will just tell you, we don't do this very often in the state because it's hard to track time and other things, but there's really ample evidence that the more coworkers do things outside of work, the better the relationships are. But if you can't do that, are you consciously on your team trying to create where you have traditions? You have rituals that you do together where birthday lunches, right? Or every Thursday you get together to do this trivia, right? That sort of thing, right? The secret sauce of the banana car mascot. Yeah, that was a fun. Our DHRM did a race, banana car racing. Anyway, even the other thing I'll tell you is do you have inside jokes on your teams? What I will tell you this is what it takes is conscious effort. So many of us languish with poor relationships at work, and it impacts our mental, our emotional, physical health even. And we just kind of throw up our hands and we say, well, that's what I have to work with. That's silliness. You have to work consciously on improving relationships at work. Now, I happen to get lucky, and I mean this genuinely. I'm not just brown nosing here. I work with an incredible team. And those of you that have worked with them know that they're incredible people, but also we do work at it. Okay, we do work at it, right? By the way, just for some seems ancient now, from 1871, Charles Darwin, right? He says, look, people sometimes misunderstand what natural selection, evolution, right? Natural selection is. He says, historically, what we see in anthropology is tribes that were ready to aid one another and sacrifice themselves for the common good, they're going to be victorious over tribes. And he's like, that would be natural selection. That's how some civilizations thrive and others didn't. Is who are the ones that are like, I got your back, you got mine, and we're going to thrive together. Okay, so we've spent 20 minutes or so talking about positive relationships at work and some quick and dirty ways to make sure we're building that, but intentionality matters the most. Now we're going to get into this thing. We're going to spend the bulk of our time. I'm going to keep talking fast. Stay with me. This thing that I've avoided for 15 years. We're going to talk about dealing with difficult people. Okay, so buckle up. The first thing we want to talk about is think about this. What makes someone difficult at work? And I want you to think about throughout your careers, in any job that you've had, I want you to go to someone that you say, yeah, I had a difficult time with them. Okay. Think about that for a second. Almost always, it's one of two things is happening. There's either a norm violation. In other words, you're saying, that person acts this way, I don't think they should be acting that way. That violates what I think is my values. That violates what I think our culture is here in this organization or on this team. I think they're acting not illegally, but I think we all volunteer for projects. They don't volunteer for projects. That's weird. We don't act that way here. It's a norm violation, right? That's not the kind of culture we want around here. That's one way. The other thing is this, what we call self-image violation. Because of the way they act, or because of a different value set that they have, or the way that they treat you, if you really stop and think about it, you did not like the way, directly or indirectly, this person made you feel. They made you feel maybe like you weren't as competent as you think you are, because they're so dismissive of your ideas. You're like, wait, I'm really good at my job. Why do I feel like crap every time I'm around this person, right? Why am I being treated this way? If we were to categorize almost all difficult relationships at work, it almost always comes down to a norm violation or a self-image violation. Now, why is this useful? It's useful because if we're going to improve our difficult relationships at work, we have to start getting to the root of why they're difficult for us and why this is bothersome for us. Okay, so think about those, and I'm going to ask you to maybe conjure up those difficult relationships again here in a second. So, one of the things I'm going to have to tell you is we need to differentiate between what makes someone a difficult person versus other kinds of behaviors. So first and foremost, if there was illegal behavior, you're like, yeah, I had a really hard time because this person was bullying me, or there was violence, or they sexually harassed me. That's a whole other animal from what we're going to talk about. Please, as soon as you can, call HR, call someone in charge. Do not tolerate illegal behavior, okay? We are not talking about illegal stuff here. Now, on the other extreme here, we do have, as you know, every relationship, we have little things that maybe irritate us a little, right? I call it's a fun word, peccadillos, right? They're meaning these little indiscretions that we just tolerate. Maybe you hate your coworker's cologne or perfume. Who cares, right? Maybe you think they talk about their pet birds too much, or maybe you think they're too quiet in meetings or talk too much in meetings. Maybe you think they do webinars and they talk too fast, right? You know, whatever else it might be. Okay, they don't ever volunteer for anything, and that bugs you. Or they volunteer for everything, and that bugs you. Or maybe you know they hold different political views than you. Having positive relationships means sometimes just tolerating that stuff. So my wife, for example, when we got married, I learned about her saying "bless you" after someone sneezes is really critically important. She got really offended when I'm like, I've been around you all day. You have a cold. This is like the 6th time you've sneezed. I'm not going to say "bless you" every time, right? It really bothered her. And then I realized after a while, I'm like, now I'm really good at it with the bless yous, because what do I care? Swallow it, right? Just take it. And I'm like, you know what? I love my wife. I want a good relationship with. Is that big of a deal for me to say, hey, bless you, right? There are these little things that happen all the time that I'm telling you right now. In fact, if these little peccadillos are you like, I have a difficult relationship with this person over these small, what we'll call small things, it's very possible that you are the difficult person. I know personally, I struggle with people that are offended over every little thing. I personally, that's a bias I have, right? So what about this middle category here? When do you know when it's not a peccadillo anymore, right? When it's become, this is a difficult person. What are the signs that you ought to, sorry, I have a cold, my voice is going. What are the signs that this is a bigger problem? Well, if all of a sudden you're leaving work and this relationship is consuming your thoughts, that's a problem. If this relationship is causing you to be sluggish or angry or irritable or avoid work, or your motivation is low, that's a problem. If it's costing you sleep because of the anxiety or the anger or frustration, that's a sign that this is time. It's time to do something about this. Sleeping too much, right? Same thing. If you love the work, you love the task that you have in your job, but you kind of hate your job, probably a sign that it's time to do something. This is a difficult relation. This is a difficult person for you, right? If you think about changing jobs because of one person, it's a sign that it might be time to do something, right? If you think your effectiveness, your team's effectiveness, or your agency's effectiveness is compromised, it's time to do something. And if you've gone to silence or violence, if you go to work and you just shut down because you don't want to deal with this person, it's time to do something about it. Or if you find yourself lashing out all the time, it's time to do something about it. Okay, now we know this is what we need to talk about. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to tell you, going back, let me go back a slide here. These peccadillos, the first thing I'm going to tell you, some of you, this is going to offend you, and I apologize for that. But the first thing you need to do, if it's just a small thing, a lot of times it's like, hey, getting along with people sometimes means getting over things. Some of your best friends, your siblings, your spouses, your families, they have habits or other things that kind of annoy. They might not be doing it knowing that it offends you or bothers you. So from Roman emperor and philosopher here, Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, he writes, reject your sense of injury, and sometimes the injury itself disappears. So a lot of times, like, hey, they're probably not doing that to bug me. And if once we accept that, then a lot of times it's like, okay, then all of a sudden it doesn't offend us anymore. It doesn't irritate us as much anymore, right? And then Carl Jung, right, one of the first psychoanalysts, says everything that irritates us about others actually leads us into insights about ourselves. So I'm going to go through this quickly. Let's say you've decided you've got a difficult relationship, difficult person at work. Generally speaking, you have four choices. You can exit, meaning you can say, I'm out of here. I'm going to leave. And that's a big decision to make. I would advise you to take other steps first. Then on the bottom left there, you have neglect, meaning you can, and I would advise you against this as well. You'd be like, I'm not going to leave my job. I'm just not going to produce anymore. My motivation is going to go down. My production is going to go down. My engagement is going to go down. I'd advise against that. The more constructive things here on the right, in fact, I'm going to tell you, this is a common pattern I've used with people in coaching in the state quite a bit. When there's something you don't like at work, these are our options. It stands true for difficult relationships as well. Loyalty, I'm going to switch this. I'm going to say tolerate. Well, I just got done saying that a lot of times you can make the choice. It's kind of passive. You say, you know what? They do this. They have this personality. It's not my favorite, but I'm going to try and get over it. I think that's actually, in a lot of ways, that's constructive. But if you've gone down that difficult person list, you said, no, I need to do something about this. I want you to have, we're going to give you some things where you can take voice and take action. Okay? Voice and action. This is the most constructive. These are always available to you, right? But I think the most productive is top right. Is I'm going to take some action, or I'm going to talk to this person about this. Okay. So a lot of what I'm about to share with you, one of the reasons I've decided it's now time to do a training on dealing with difficult people is because Amy Gallo here out of Harvard, wrote a book, and she actually made a taxonomy of here are the most common difficult types. I'm going to go through this. Now, it's always dangerous to start labeling people. But as I go through this list, I'm going to ask you, before we even get into the details, I'm going to give you a poll here. I want you to think about the difficult types that are most prevalent to you. Now, I'm going to take you through a coaching session, okay? So let's say, I just see one name, Brittany Taylor is new, right? This is her first time doing it off the shelf. So let's say Brittany Taylor comes to me and says, Dan, I need coaching. I've got this difficult person that I work with at work, and it's starting to affect my work, or here are the reasons why I know I shouldn't just tolerate it. Here's something I should do about it. This is the process that I would take Brittany to. And I want to invite each of you, if you think about the difficult relationships you've had in the history of your careers, I would invite you to go through the same very simple process. The first thing I would say is, okay, the what. Brittany, I'm just going to keep using your name. Okay, Brittany, what is the problem behavior? I want you to be as specific as you can, not just they're annoying. I want you to be as specific as you can and give me examples of why, of the problematic behavior. Okay. And then the question is, so what? So what? So this person acts this way. Why is that problematic? What is the impact of their behavior? Because they act that way, how does it make you feel? How does it impact your motivation? You've got to get specific about why there's an actual tangible emotional, physical, productivity impact or something. And then in an hour-long coaching session, I'd say, okay, Brittany, now what? You've given me good reasons why this is something that you should address. What do you think your options are? How can you go about doing this? So I'm going to give you, as we go through this taxonomy very quickly, I'm going to give each of you, we're going to give the what, the so what, and now what to each of these. Okay. So stay with me here. These are the 7 types that we're going to talk about today that Amy Gallo covers. Now, Shane, will you put up a poll up there? The insecure boss, the pessimist, the victim, the passive aggressive peer, the know-it-all, the tormentor, the political operator. Now, we haven't given you a lot of details here, but I just launched a poll, and we're only going to give you a few seconds to answer this. Of those 7, right now, before we go through those, which type do you think would be the most difficult for you? The insecure boss, the pessimist, the victim, the passive-aggressive peer, the person who knows everything, the person that kind of bullies and torments, or the person who's super political in everything that they do? Go ahead and answer that poll. The passive aggressive peer, Rebecca Pollock. Oh, 6. Okay. Do you guys see the poll? The poll is bottom right. Go ahead and fill this out in the poll. Bottom right with that square, circle, triangle. Okay. People are putting this in the chat. Shane, do we have the poll? Do we have the answer to the poll yet?
Do you want it to end?
Yeah. Go ahead and end it. Man, a lot of know-it-alls taking a hit here. Okay, a lot of you are putting this in the chat. That's fine. Keep them coming. Julie says she can't see the poll. Did any thumbs up somebody if you saw the poll? Okay, thank you. Go ahead. What does our poll say, Shane?
The insecure boss has 28 votes. The pessimist has 18 votes. The victim has 39 votes. The passive aggressive peer has 64 votes.
Ooh.
The know-it-all has 52 votes. The tormentor has 58 votes, and the political operator has 19 votes.
Who has the most?
The passive aggressive peer.
Passive aggressive peer. Okay, we'll talk about that. Now, stay with me here. You're the person that as you've thought about the difficult relationship you've had, the person might not fit a category here perfectly, or maybe not at all. But see if some of this is at all relevant to you. Okay. So first, we're going to go through the insecure boss, and I don't think there's a better example of the insecure boss than Michael Scott here, right? Who has a desperate need to be liked and praised and all that kind of stuff. So let's go to our what. What is the behavior of an insecure boss? They're usually overly concerned with what others think about them. A lot of times, if they're insecure, they gotta approve everything. They don't allow sometimes others, if they're insecure, they don't allow you to go interact with other senior leaders because they're like, well, then they're going to think they're the boss, that sort of thing. They're always highlighting their credentials and how qualified they are, or they're unable to make a decision. Now, an insecure boss doesn't have to do all of these. These are just general things of the what. What is a problem behavior that often associated with an insecure boss? Well, so what? The evidence says from Amy Gallo and others that an insecure boss tends to lead to increased stress and anxiety for those that they lead on the job. They might take credit for your work. Very often, if they're insecure, they don't seek feedback because they can't handle the feedback that you give them. Very often, good ideas get smothered or there's not any healthy conflict because they can't take it. And quite frankly, very often, if they're an insecure boss, they might not represent your team very well to other people in the organization because, and that matters, I should say, because there's limited resources and your team might not be getting that, right? So what do you do if you're struggling with an insecure boss? First of all, think about the pressure they face. Very often, right? Empathy is always good. They face pressures from higher ups that you and I might not be aware of, right? So have empathy for them in that way. The second thing is to help them achieve their goals. Find out what their goals are, then help them achieve that, and let them know that you're not a threat. You're not coming for their job, right? Let them know that you're happy in your role, that sort of thing. This is going to seem unpleasant to some of us, but pay compliments and express appreciation for what they do, and give them a sense of control. Hey, we've got this project, but I wanted to give you a chance to make have final thoughts on it, right? And then because they can impact your confidence, good advice always is keep a compliments folder. When you get that email from someone who said, hey, your work has been fantastic, put that somewhere, an electronic file somewhere, right? So that's what you do with the insecure boss. You guys, stay with me. I'm going to go through these quickly, right? Then we've got the pessimist here. There's Eeyore for us. Well, what does the pessimist do? They complain about, by the way, I think we have a problem with this lots of places, but very often in the state, we have a problem with this. They complain about everything. Every new initiative is doomed to fail. The response they often get is, oh, we've already tried that. That'll never work. We've already tried that. Not that that's wrong, but they say it to everything. They always point out the risks, right? And why something won't work just as a default. And they only have negative things to say, even though there's a positive change, even though there's a good thing. Hey, we're getting 3% COLA. Yeah, that means they're not going to give us anything next year, right? Something like that, right? Is the pessimist. Well, why does that matter? Because emotions are contagious. And it starts to impact all of us. We start to get these microcultures of cynicism and negativity. we catch it, right? And that can reduce our job satisfaction. So what do you do when you work with a pessimist? Well, on some cases, when they're saying that won't work, the first thing you do is you reframe it as a gift. You say, hey, this is they're right on a lot of occasions. They're pointing out the holes in our plan or this initiative. That's a good thing, right? So you give them a role to play. You let them know that there's virtue to pointing out these things, but then you make them do more than complain. So if we're in a team meeting, someone's like, oh, that's not going to work. You're like, okay, why won't it work? This reason. Okay, good. So if we had to make it work, what could we do in spite of those things? I agree with you. And I appreciate you always bringing up the, helping us have a critical eye for projects. Now, what do we do? Right? If you need to help them, have a conversation with them about how it's helpful to have that critical thinking, but how it's counterproductive if we never do anything but just say it'll never work, right? And then you can remind them of hurdles in the past you've overcome. So it's not likely that no change has ever worked. And say, well, I remember we said that we were all cynical about this thing and we made that work, right? And then sometimes on occasion, if you're around a pessimist, you just got to get away from them. you just got to get away from them. And that's fine. If you need to spend, if they're going to go into pessimist mode, just be like, hey, you know what? And they're spiraling in a one-on-one conversation and be like, hey, I got to use the bathroom even or something. Don't let yourself catch that, right? Okay, moving along quickly. I got to be careful with this. Related to the pessimist is the victim. And it says here, Dan's neighbor, but that's not actually my neighbor, okay? Because I'm only going to put a picture of my neighbor. But there's this an assessment called the victim syndrome list. And as I was preparing for this, I asked my wife. I said, "Hey, I'm going to read this victim syndrome checklist, and I want you to tell you to tell me who this reminds you of." And I started reading. I only got like 4 questions in, and she named our neighbor, which is who I was thinking of. But interesting, even before she did that, I wasn't very circumspect about this. I was reading this off to my wife. My son, who's 12, walked by. And before my wife could answer, he said, oh, he threw out a name, and it's our neighbor's son, who's his same age. I'm just like, oh, gosh, okay, this is not a problem. So I wasn't going to put my actual neighbor on here. But the victim is related to the pessimist, okay? So what does the victim do? They're always feeling sorry for themselves. There's always a party, and they have an external locus of nothing's in their control. This external locus of control is it just happens to me. I can't do anything about it. They always have excuses. They may have excuses why things are their fault. They tend to drag others down with their poor me attitude, right? They wallow in negative feelings, and they always forecast failure, like the pessimist, but especially for themselves. Well, why does this matter? It's freaking exhausting. Okay, being around a victim. It can be irritating. Again, there's emotional contagion. And those of you that know that you've been around victims before, they come and if you let them, they take an hour and a half of your time wallowing about how everything is wrong with them, right? So what do you do? What do you do? One thing is you offer validation, because I want to be very careful here. There are actual victims in our society, right? So the first thing is don't dismiss out of hand, and then you help them increase their sense of control. One of the questions we'll talk about is, what can you control? What can you control? And interestingly enough, one of the things you can do for someone who's always a victim is put them in a situation where you help them help others. Nothing will get people out of this victim cycle more quickly than having to think about others, right? And then if you need to, you got to protect yourself. You can't, it's kind of like the pessimist, right? Change the subject if you need to. Go on to something more positive or walk away. You just need to preserve your own sanity here. You cannot always wallow with the wallowers, right? So that's the victim. Moving along, stay with me here quickly. Again, here's another Friends reference. It just happened, the meme happened to work, right? The one that got the most votes, the passive aggressive peer. Let's talk about this. What do they tend to do? Sometimes we're like, yeah, I'll get that done. Then they don't do it. They promise to do something. It never happens. And then maybe they say, oh, did you tell me about that? I don't remember you asking about that, right? Here's a big one. They display angry or upset body language, but then, it says insist they are fine. It should say insist they are fine, right? This is the most common thing where it's like, no, we're good. But everything that they're communicating is, no, they're not good. They're mad at you. Or they say things in a way like they act rudely. They're like, yeah, okay, great idea. And you're like, oh, do you not like my idea? They're like, no, it's great. and you're just like, okay, I feel like there's gaslighting going on here, right? They imply things, but they never talk about it directly. They hint at things, right? We've got a passive aggressive problem in society today, right? We just do. Well, why was this the leading vote getter? Do you think? Well, you start to get self-doubt in your mind. Like, I'm not reading situations very well, right? On teams, it leads to slower decision making because no one knows how this person actually feels. It leads to worse communication. It perpetuates unhealthy conflict, and because healthy conflict requires candid conversation and dialogue. Healthy conflict does, right? And passive aggressive behavior eliminates that. It erodes psychological safety. People are like, I don't want to say anything overall. And there's good evidence. I'm in some ways, I'm glad this one was the leading vote getter, because when you have a passive aggressive person or persons on a team, the evidence is there's poorer performance overall. So, man, what do you do with the passive aggressive peer or boss or whomever else? The first thing you do is you probably don't call them passive aggressive. It tends to be like, what? Right? Boom. It tends to not solve things because there's such a stigma with that label, right? What you can start doing to circumvent their behaviors, focus on the content of their communication and not the delivery. And what I mean by that is they say, hey, I'm fine with this report. It's fine. Even though they seem like they're meant for, they'd be like, okay, tell me, are you actually fine with this content? And if you're not, tell me what you're not happy with. One of the things that I think is really instructive is very often passive aggressive communication is more common virtually. Text, email, IM. Don't take the bait. Someone will do something passive aggressively in email and we will respond passive aggressively. I found myself in a non-work setting just this past week where I realized I didn't know I was doing it, but I sent a passive aggressive text. I said it was for something else outside of work, but I was like, well, if you remember, we talked about this in our meeting on which is kind of like, I don't know, a little bit passive aggressive. And they did not take the bait. They said, sorry, my bad memory. And I was like, oh, I'm such a jerk. Why did I word it that way? So be like this other person that I was texting. Don't take the bait, right? Be more direct with your requests of the passive aggressive person. Say, so they can't hide behind it. Say, okay, so you'll get me that report on November 15th, and even start documenting. We have someone in HR who felt like we were being around a gaslighter. And so this person who's very high up in HR, so it's taking notes at every meeting. So this person couldn't come back and say, I never said that, because they had a habit of doing that. Check your perceptions with others too. You don't want to go into gossip mode, but you want to check with others and be like, hey, did that seem weird to you? Right? So you're not thinking that you're crazy. And if you're a manager and you've got someone who communicates passive aggressively on the team, you have an obligation to get that out of there. It's going to impact the whole team negatively. Okay. I've got to fly through this, guys. I'm running out of time and I'm taking too long with this. The know-it-all. Sheldon's a pretty good know-it-all here. What do they tend to do? They monopolize conversations by talking over others, right? They position their own ideas. They'll make a statement like, nope, here's the best way to go. And they'll just position their idea as superior to others. They'll speak in condescending tones to others, or they'll jump into conversations uninvited and give their, expertise. And they rarely ask questions of others or show curiosity. Be like, oh, what are your thoughts on this? They just don't tend to do that. Well, what does the know-it-all do? It eliminates healthy conflict, right? And it makes people lose confidence. They're like, well, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. The other thing that it can do, if you've got a know-it-all who talks over you, it can change other people's perceptions of you. It can hurt your credibility because they're like, well, this must be the expert then, right? The other thing that it can do, it can make organizations realize that they don't have the talent they think they do because it's know-it-all. It's like, oh, I know everything. It's like, actually, it's likely they don't. And so it can lead to talent shortages in organizations. So moving quickly, what do we do with the know-it-all? The first thing is appreciate what they are expert in. They probably do have expertise in some things and value that, honor that, right? The other thing you can do is preempt. If they are interrupters, you can preempt the interruptions. You can say, hey, I need to talk about this and I'd like to get through it or else I'll lose my train of thought. And so if everyone can hold off interrupting, sometimes that's not going to work. So when they do interrupt, just say, oh, hold on, Dan, I'm going to lose my train of thought if I don't get through this. I need to stop you there. Okay. The other thing you need to do is set team norms, because very often maybe you're verbally confident enough that you're not going to let them talk over you, but you know that others on their team aren't that way. And so they're going to get talked over. If you talk as a team and say, I would like it that we stop interrupting each other. And that we let other people talk, and that gives you license then to call the person out when you say, be like, oh, hold on, remember we're working on not interrupting, that sort of thing. The other thing with the know-it-all is to ask for facts and data. So they'll make these grand claims because their opinion is just so valuable. But then you say, oh, what led you to that opinion? What data do you have? And either one, it forces them to prove their expertise in something, or very often it's just their way of communicating that they don't realize that they're communicating in a way that they're like, my opinion is I know everything about everything. And so when you ask for facts for data or data, it puts them in a spot, not rudely, not confrontationally, but in a diplomatic way. It forces them to back up their claims, right? Don't take the bait and start one-upping them in your expertise. And sometimes, right, you'll just need to go and talk to them. And this is true with all of these situations. Go have a difficult conversation with them. Okay, stay with me. I'm worried about, if we were in a live classroom right now, I'd be worried about your energy levels. We're almost done. Okay, we're almost done with this. We've got the tormentor next, right? What is the tormentor? Usually it's a boss, and they give you busy work. They set near impossible standards. They accuse you of not being busy enough, or they always claim you're not committed enough. They put down your accomplishments, or they talk about the rough old days or the things that they've done to sacrifice in their career and how easy you have it now. And I have actually seen this last one happen, where they mistreat someone, and then the second that person stands up for themselves, they say, oh, I've been testing you. Literally, someone very high up said, I need you to know I've been testing you and you've passed. It's such garbage. Okay, it's such nonsense, right? Look, when you have a tormentor, it leads to high stress levels, high turnover, lower productivity, lack of engagement. This is what all the social scientific evidence says. So what do you do with the tormentor? One of the tricks you can do is you can go to the tormentor and ask for their advice. Nothing wins a person over to your side more than getting them to invest in you by you genuinely, make sure it's something genuine, you go and ask for their advice on something. Because all of a sudden now you're their project, you're their investment. Right? Similarly, focus on a shared goal, something that you know matters to them, that you're helping them work on. The other thing is make yourself indispensable. Amy Gallo says, find something that is absolutely critical that maybe is a weakness of theirs in the organization and become expert in that, and you become indispensable. It's hard for them to keep tormenting you that way. Build a strong, if you're really scared about a tormentor, build a strong network outside of, especially when it's a boss, go to their peers or above them and build that network. And then, of course, again, with the compliments folder, so you don't lose your confidence. You realize, no, I'm good at my job. This is a toxic dynamic here. And then if you need to have a difficult conversation, be very careful with this one, with the difficult conversation, okay? Finally, we've got the political operator. I will be honest with you. I think this is the most challenging for me, personally. What does the political operator do? They take undue credit. They go out of their way to gain favor with those in power to advance their careers more than is normal, right? There's nothing wrong with trying to advance your career, but they do it in an obsequious way, right? They act like they're in charge when they aren't. This is a very common one. Sometimes they'll hoard information so that they're like, oh, because information is power, right? They'll gossip and spread rumors, especially about coworkers that they're threatened by. They'll try and get people against that person. Right, they'll push their own agenda and other things at the expense of team and agency goals. Okay, this is a big problem. It erodes trust. It creates unhealthy competition. But on occasion, if you're dealing with a political operator, they can ruin your status and cost you opportunities professionally. This can be very dangerous. You've got to be very careful about this. So the first thing, what for this is, don't violate your values. If you don't want to be political, don't do that. But also, every organization has some politics. Is it possible that you should be doing more networking in a healthy way? It might be a signal that maybe you should be doing a little more of that. If you're like me, I hate doing that stuff, but sometimes we need to do a little more of it. Make your good work known. Don't be afraid to make sure that people know the stuff that you're doing. Right, including keeping track of all the projects and successes that you've had. Don't get used by them. Very often, a political operator will bring you into their confidence And then like, oh yeah, we're tight now. And they're trying to get information, but really they're taking that information and then using it against you. So don't get used by them. The other thing is model giver behavior. I'll take the high road. Take the high road and just be like, no, that's fine that this person is hyper political. I'm not going to start withholding information or mistreating them. But then if you have to, have a difficult conversation and say, hey, I noticed that you didn't put my name on that report. Or in that you were a spokesperson for that project, but you said my and I on everything that you said instead of mentioning the team. We all worked on that, right? So you guys, that's super fast. Now you might have, there are 450,000 different types of difficult coworkers, right? Those are 7 that we've identified. And some of those some of the challenges you have might fit into that a little more, but I want you to remember this model here for yourself. If you were to come to me or any of our coaches, we might run you through something like this, be like, okay, what is the problem behavior? And so what? Why is that a problem? What's the impact? And then, okay, what are some things that you can do now? And there's a million different options of things you can do, specific things you can do. We just ran through a bunch of them. To conclude here, we're not going to be able to get to as much stuff as I wanted to because I'm an over-preparer and I've talked too much. But I want to conclude with 9 things that you can do no matter what the situation, no matter the type of difficult person, that'll make you more effective. Okay? Here's what they are. If you leave with nothing else, leave with these. Always, always, always focus on what you can control. What is it within my immediate control? What can I handle? And one of the answers to that is always your reaction to things, your emotions to things. Okay. Number 2, remember that your perspective is just one perspective. Ask yourself this question. What if I'm wrong about this situation? And if I were wrong, how would I act differently? What if I'm just seeing it from only my angle? There's rarely one objective reality. Okay. Everyone has a different perspective. Third thing is you need to be aware of your biases. Am I being fair to this person, or is it confirmation bias? Did they act this way one time and then I've searched for those behaviors other time? Or does this person happen to annoy me? And even though others might do these things, it only bugs me when this person does it. And now I'm calling them out on it, right? The other thing you have to avoid is making it me against them. Right now, some of you have a really difficult colleague, and I'm going to invite you to not say, because once you say that's my enemy, then they become something to vanquish rather than they're a fellow colleague. They could be a friend. We have this mutual problem where we don't work the same way together. Okay. We don't work the same way together. How can we squash that? How can we resolve that? Right. Always, always, always rely on empathy to see things differently. Right. Tell yourself from the Crucial Conversation series, tell yourself another story about this person. I think they're acting this way because they're a tormentor. Or I think they're acting this way because they're insecure boss. Or what's another story you can tell yourself about why they're behaving that way, right? Before you try and do something about a difficult person, you need to know your goal. And what you cannot do, you need to ask yourself is, do I have ulterior motives? So you might say, well, my goal is to have a good working relationship. When really, if we gave you truth serum, you say, I want to ruin their freaking career, right? Because they have bugged me this way, this way, this way, or I want to get more power than them, or I want to look better to the team than they are, or something like that. You've got to check those ulterior motives, okay? And then really ask, what ultimately do you want here? Generally speaking, you want to avoid gossip. Mostly. On occasion, gossip, when you're checking your perceptions with other people, can be very healthy and be like, am I reading this wrong with someone you trust? Just make sure you're not creating in-groups. You're not doing it to be like, hey, you're with me, right? So when I go against this person, I've got allies. Don't do that. You're just making the problem worse, okay? And then experiment to find out what works. As we went through the different difficult types there, we went through all these people. Don't try one thing and be like, well, that didn't work. I'm stuck with a crappy working relationship. No, try other things, right? Try multiple things, right? And then maybe most importantly, be and stay curious. What can I learn from this person? What can I learn from this situation about myself, about how I can be a better worker? The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. Do not wait. Do not leave here. It's 11 o'clock. Don't leave here and say, I don't want to be nice to this person. Very often it is our attitudes follow behavior, not behavior following attitude. So the best advice I can give you is if you want to improve the relationship, working relationship you have right now, go and be nice to them anyway, or even go and serve them anyway. Treat them like they are invaluable. Treat them like a great person, and all of a sudden your attitude will start to change. This sounds very trite. It sounds almost Sunday schoolish, but the overwhelming evidence is that that is the number one thing that you can do to change the dynamic. You and I need to be better. We need to be more professional. We need to be more kind. We can't let them turn us into something we don't want to be. We can't inhale their toxicity, and that's going to give you the best opportunity to change that relationship. Now, we might say there's a lot more to talk about here. I'll probably save that for a future off the shelf. But if you have questions or other things, will you please reach out to us? I'm out of time. I need to stop here. Please remember the off the shelf from JJ Acker, March 27th. I'm going to stick around for a minute to talk about some things. But everybody, let's make our teams better. Let's make our working relationships better, and watch how that changes the rest of our lives. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.